So today I wanted to talk about some impressions of the new Jethro Tull album, RökFlöte. Now, this is their second release in 2 years, following last year's album, Zealot Gene, and I have to say that I've been totally caught off guard by how good this is, and by this very late career artistic renaissance that Ian Anderson seems to be having. And that's especially true because I really haven't had any interest at all in anything they've done since the 70s, frankly. You know, with a lot of bands from the prog era, I've been able to find at least some redeeming value in pretty much every portion of their catalog. But, you know, the Tull material from the 80s onward, I don't think there's even a single song between, let's say, A and Zealot Gene that isn't either kind of a chore or more ironically amusing than good. Maybe that's unduly harsh, but that's how I've always felt, and it made me pretty reluctant to give these albums a shot. Now, Zealot Gene, when I did hear it last year, really surprised me with its dark, serious tone, its strong melodies, its memorable writing, and in particular the way that the style and the lyrical themes felt a little bit unrooted from time, which is something I want to talk about more later. But in spite of that, I was once again kind of underwhelmed by the prospect of RökFlöte. You know, the title kind of makes it sound more like a bad compilation than a specific album, right? I get that it's a pun on the rock and Ragnarok, but the pun doesn't really carry any level of meaning. But as it turned out, that title nearly kept me away from a surprisingly inspired piece of work, and I'm really glad I did end up giving it a shot. So what's happening on RökFlöte? Well, lyrically, the focus is on Norse deities, hence again, the rock in the rock pun in the title. And, you know, that's not a topic that I find particularly interesting or original at this point in history. I know Ian Anderson probably doesn't listen to a lot of black or death metal, but those styles have kind of run the whole topic of Norse deities pretty firmly into the ground, I think. But what he does here is surprisingly effective, using the mythological themes and characters as metaphorical frames for more contemporary vignettes and scenes. At least I think that's what he's doing. That's what I've read, that's what he's doing. You know, I've listened to this album several times in the last few days, and I still couldn't really quote many details of the lyrics or really tell you in a particularly informed way what they're about, which is unusual for me. I'm generally a pretty lyric-focused listener, right? But I've come to regard that as a virtue a little bit. What I mean is that the lyrics are interesting while they're happening. They provide some imagery and kind of scene color that complements the music in interesting ways. But, you know, they stay out of the way, right? There's no attempt at didacticism. There's no misplaced humor. There's no kind of stale cliche. I'm not saying they're meaningless, but they allow the meaning to be subtle and unobtrusive. And musically, the songs may be relatively short, relatively straightforward in their structure, but the playing and arrangements are remarkably complex. They're full of detail. They use a wide-ranging blend of elaborate flute lines and synth and keyboard sounds, really intricate guitar leads. It pulls bits of style from a lot of different things, but puts them together in a way that feels very seamless, feels very integrated, makes intuitive sense. And what strikes me more than else is that nothing here feels lazy or underdeveloped or pandering or compromised for the sake of accessibility. Again, even though these are short songs, they're surprisingly full of musical detail that does take a lot of time to sink in. The band here and I'm just going to read this off the list, I don't know this by heart, right? The band here of David Goodyear on bass, John O'Hara on keyboards, Scott Hammond on drums, Joe Parrish James on guitar. That band is very tight, it's very skillful, it plays music that feels balanced and elaborate without being overcomplicated, and all the players are really complementing Anderson's vision as a writer. Now, Anderson's voice is a bit thin, it's a bit fragile sounding, you know, but when it comes to aging as a singer, I think he kind of has the ironic advantage of never having been notably athletic or powerful, right? So he doesn't really have as far to fall. Now, some of his live renditions of the old songs have been pretty painful lately, let's be honest, but in terms of the new material, he knows how to write for what he can do now. What's ultimately striking here, though, I think, is that this and Zealot Gene feel like the first Tull albums that are totally unmoored from time and place. You know, from a production standpoint, this really could have been made, I think, almost at any point in the last 30 years, right? If you were to hear this without knowing when it came out, there's nothing in how it's produced or the sounds that they're using that really tie it to any particular point at all. There's no awkward attempt at relevance, as in jtoll.com. You know, I've heard that the song Hammer on Hammer, for instance, is sort of about the war in Ukraine, but it's done in a pretty subtle way that doesn't insist on making its point. And in particular, if that is tied to a current event, it's not so tied to that current event that it's going to date the song for a future listener. And musically, you know, the writing doesn't feel like it's reacting to anything in particular. It doesn't feel like it's trying to push in one direction or pull in another based on what's come before. It doesn't feel like it's trying to do any particular thing relative to larger trends. It just is. I've talked in some of my previous videos about the sense I have that style is exhausted in music, right? That in a way there is no contemporary music. There's just cyclic blends and variations on pre-existing styles and ideas. And while I usually present that as bad, in this case, it seems like it's benefiting Tull because they've been able to find a style that really does sit out of time. There's nothing left to react to. There's no contemporary style to either push against or try to co-opt. The music just is. Now, I don't have any evidence that Anderson is thinking that way, but that's the context this is being received in for me as a listener. And, you know, whatever it is, it's resulted in an album that is really vastly better than I would have expected or than it has, honestly, any right to be. It's really impressive to see something this confident and this characteristic being done so late in their career. Thanks for your time, and I'll see everybody next week.